This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Coming up next, Shawn Powers and I talk with Fred Stutzman about Freedom, his company, his background in open source, and lots of stuff going all the way back to Sunsite and Ibiblio and other really important stuff in the history of open source. And that's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 631, recorded Wednesday, May 26th, 2021. The future of focused work. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Command Line Heroes, a podcast that tells the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who are revolutionizing the technology landscape. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts and download it today. And by Melissa. Like expired milk, 30% of your customers' data goes bad every year. That's money down the drain. Visit Melissa's developer portal for free access to data quality APIs, demos, and code samples. Freshen up your sour data today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. Good day or night or whatever it is, wherever you are in the world. I am Doc Searls, and welcome to Floss Weekly. And my co-host today is Shawn Powers, who came off the bench at the last minute. I won't go into what went wrong, but this went right. How you doing, Shawn?
I'm doing well. There may be dogs barking in the background. I'll try to keep that to a minimum, but it's going well.
Well, there may be a leaf blower or a chainsaw going in the background here, so we're even. You're still in northern Michigan somewhere? It's
true. Yeah. Yesterday was in the 80s, and today is in the 50s, because that's what it's like to live in Michigan.
Yeah, it's like let's force the blooms out of the trees and then freeze them to death, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the trick. So our guest today is Fred Stutzman, who I know from years ago in our common link in North Carolina, in the identity world. Since you came off the bench, you probably know approximately nothing so far, but I think what Fred's doing is cool stuff. And he is also the CEO of Freedom. So in case you were wondering, right?
Yeah, Freedom. As a concept, if he's the CEO, I'm a big fan. And I'll probably be a big fan regardless. But I assure you that my questions will be genuine and non-rehearsed. So
okay, great. Well, let's get right into it. I'll bring up the right tab here and let everybody know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Command Line Heroes. Command Line Heroes is a podcast that shares with you the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who have and still are revolutionizing the technology landscape. And season 7 is out now. Season 7 of Command Line Heroes explores a pivotal year, 1995. It was the start of the dot-com boom, but a lot of things had to come together for the internet to succeed. So meet the internet class of 95. That was when, long before you could hop on GoDaddy and grab a domain name, there was a woman you had to call. Elizabeth Jake Feinler was the keeper of all domains. Episode 1 of the season features a conversation with the woman herself, now in her 90s, about how she managed the internet and how her team helped to create the DNS. 1995 was the year that ISPs became the dominant gateway to the information superhighway. That's what we called it then. But how do we go from ARPANET all the way to that? It turns out none of it would have happened without a team of intrepid engineers at the University of Michigan and a network they built called NSFNet. Web design took a while to become a career, but got a big boost in 1995 when Batman Forever, that website, launched to promote the movie. It showed people what was possible on the web. And that episode features pioneers like Jeffrey Zeldman, the godfather of web design, who recounts the shift that forever changed the face of the web. A new search engine launched in 1995 that took the world by storm. It had a number of firsts: a fast and advanced web crawler, whole page translation from a number of different languages back into English, and something called Flypaper, Hear how Alta Vista was the first search engine for the 21st century. I used all of that stuff. Oh my gosh. 1995 was a pivot point, the moment when the internet went from academic curiosity to global phenomenon. Command Line Heroes is hosted by developer and podcaster Suran Yitbarek. I got a sneak preview of season 7, and it really gives some deep insight about the history behind technology and who has been a part of it. Check out all the incredible stories from season 7 today. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts. That's Command Line Heroes. Download it today. Our thanks to Command Line Heroes for their support. Okay, so welcome, Fred Stutzman, to FLOSS Weekly, and you are still in North Carolina. That white box that I see you in, that is somewhere in Chapel Hill, I assume.
Beautiful North Carolina. Yes. I'm in my office in Carborough, North Carolina, right next to Chapel Hill, and I have a plumbing supply place next to me. So let's hope they don't take the time to sledgehammer tubs while we're doing the recording. That's my distraction.
The world is a noisy place. The Carborough was the last place I lived, in Chapel Hill, on Suan Court, off of North Greensboro Street. And I forgot to say what you do, because I should have started out with that. That you're the founder and CEO of Freedom, and I'll just read from your crib sheet here. A product that helps people turn off distractions so they can be more productive, and provides a bunch of jumping off points to discussions about productivity, the future of work, entrepreneurships, trends, and so forth. But where I'd like to start is the reason I called on you, because I know you have a background in open source, and I know you're involved in Ibiblio, which I remember first as something called Sunsite, I think, wasn't it?
Yep.
I think it was, and it was in Research Triangle Park or something. And so give us a little bit of a background on that, because I think that Ibiblio is really important in the history of open source.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is where I first learned about Ibiblio, when it was Sunsite. And so, my history in open source kind of goes back to the mid 90s, when to get a Linux distribution, you actually bought a book that had a CD in the back of it, and you would install it. I had a couple of those. So I was kind of an open source hacker and enthusiast, going way back, kind of my earliest, pre-college days in computing. And so once we got connected to the internet, I would find that I'm downloading all these distros from Sunsite and getting all these packages that I would use from Sunsite. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I was a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I noticed that it was sunsite.unc.edu. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. What's the backstory there? And I tracked it down. And sure enough, it was a project put together by Paul Jones, who was a professor at the School of Information and the School of Journalism at the time. And I'll jump around a little bit, but when I discovered that, I actually just went over to Paul's office. I tracked him to a stairwell, and I said, "Hey, give me a job. I want to work for you as a student." And he didn't actually give me a job. Many years later, I got a job. But the where Sunsite came from is Paul wrote a grant to Sun Microsystems to provide distribution points at academic institutions where they were connected to Internet 2 and sort of backbone peer-to-peering networks to allow faster downloads of all sorts of open source software. So that grant got Sunsite rolling, and it became a network of sites throughout the world where people would get their software, and it's a legendary URL in my opinion. And so Sunsite eventually became Ibiblio, and the story of that is Raleigh-Durham, the area that I'm in, has a very strong open source connection because it is the home of Red Hat. Red Hat got its start here in the Research Triangle. And so Paul Jones, knew Bob Young, and Bob Young made a grant to kind of fund the next generation of Sunsite. And so Paul put together an idea. He was going to be an open source digital library, which we called Ibiblio. And so if you've ever encountered Ibiblio, which, if you've got a history going back in open source software or you've been involved in open source digital libraries, you know that domain very well. Paul and Bob put together that grant, and that funded a number of students, some staff members, and people at the University of North Carolina to work on this project. And so how I got involved is I had pitched, Paul to hire me when I was a student, and he didn't hire me, his mistake. But later on, after I went out into the real world after college, I worked, in industry, and I went through the dot-com boom and bust. I wrote back to Paul and I said, hey, I'm looking for a job and would love to move back to North Carolina. And sure enough, they hired me to be kind of the director of technology at Ibiblio, which I did for 5 years, basically, project managing and building a lot of the infrastructure that, hopefully supported a good part of the open source community. That was our goal. We wanted to give people hosting. We wanted to give people access. Certainly give people networking capacity, because that was just such a rare resource back in the day. So we're talking, early 2000s at this point in time. So that was kind of the history, and obviously there's lots of stories there, but just the very quick.
Yeah, well, I should say, having the Sunsite stories. I remember when I first saw. I knew the web. I was not on it. Mm-hmm. I got close to, Gopher, Fido, stuff like that. But I did not really encounter the web, maybe used links, I don't know. But the graphical web until John Gage of Sun, he was kind of like their chief evangelist, John Gage, and was just an incredible presenter. And it was at one of Esther Dice's industry conferences, I think it was in '94, where he showed Mosaic. But he showed Sunsite, and Sunsite was like just a major nexus within the web as it stood then, and the internet as it stood then. And I just thought it was most cool that it was also in North Carolina. And then Paul, who's one of my very favorite people, and I'm sure yours too, did just this great job of something I really appreciate, which is bringing me back to North Carolina, which he did a couple times. We also at least one conference shared a room, and I remember that in San Diego. And I remember him saying, "It won't be hard because I'm not large," which he isn't. And his handle is Small Jones, and his website, I remember, is like every Paul Jones there was. John Paul Jones is like such a common name, and he positioned himself as Small Jones among all the Joneses. Anyway, so where now Ibiblio is not so much retired as sort of permanently mothballed or something at this point. Sort of like they declared it sort of done enough and it's just going to sit there for a while. Or what's the status of it now?
Well, so Paul retired last year. So after quite a career. Talk about somebody who was there for the history of the internet. And there's so many stories. And gosh, but Paul got his start in academic technologies, and he implemented the first email for the university system. And so Paul, who famously is not on email anymore, but he got his start there. He worked in academic technologies for many years and was really the visionary, bringing a lot of this new technology to the university. And through his kind of Sunsite and Ibiblio work, he transitioned over into being a professor both at the J School and at the Searls, the information school here. And so he had a 25 plus year career where he mentored, thousands of students, and had, we probably put hundreds of students through Ibiblio, many of which have gone on to work in, just you name it, every company out there. And so as part of his retirement, I think one of the things that they tried to do was say, how do we make it sustainable? Because, there's only one Paul, and we want Ibiblio to move forward. And I think what they're doing is turning it into a digital archive. So that is definitely one of the things that changed over the past couple of years is both Searls, the home sponsor of Ibiblio, has become very interested in digital archiving and preserving digital legacies. And so Ibiblio is really kind of an interesting example there, because you've got all this sort of historical aspects of the web. And there's all these very real questions about, like, how do you maintain a dynamic website, that was built many years ago, but keep it available and keep it active. So I think that is the focus now. It's certainly also doing some distribution and hosting, open source software. But yeah, the focus has turned more into the legacy of the site. And and I know they have some people working on it, because they were writing me the other day asking me about some of my projects. I was like,
I know all the URLs still work.
In 10 years.
Yeah, I know the URLs still work, which is kind of the main thing. That's been a challenge for me with 25 years of writing for Linux Journal and hoping that nothing gets 404'd. It's not good enough just that it's sitting somewhere in an archive where none of the links work, but at least it's, exists in some form. So you and I have it in my head that our first conversations had to do with identity. Am I right about that? And you were involved in something with identity? Yeah. What was that about?
Yeah. So after I worked at Ibiblio, I went into the PhD program studying information science, and got very interested in the social web. Social media was kind of, the web has always been social, but what we would kind of think of as social networks and social media was really taking off around that time. And I was studying it, very interested in it, and got interested in social representations of identity online, and thinking about sort of the problems. And actually, one of the problems that inspired that work was just what you're talking about with Paul Jones. There's only one pauljones.com, but there's many Paul Joneses out there, and that's actually a non-trivial problem on the internet, still is, and probably always will be. So a colleague of mine, Terrell Russell, and I formed a company called ClaimID, which was basically what you would call kind of a link resume. They're very common nowadays, but I think we were probably the first one out there, which allowed you to collect and verify information about you on the net, and then basically, present yourself. So here's my website, here's my GitHub, here's my X, Y, and Z, and it's a single home to all the aspects of your identity. And so we got really interested in that, and having that be kind of a implicit verification of your identity. If you can, verify that the things that you point to are yours, then that ends up building up credibility for you. And these are still really interesting and valid questions today, but we were kind of thinking about that back in the mid 2000s, and became a pretty interesting project that we never really took it further than kind of a side project, but we ended up with at that time, a couple 100,000 users and some acquisition offers and things like that, which, showed us it was a real opportunity. I think if we held on to it longer, there was probably a business there, but it was still so early. But yeah, we got involved in the Internet Identity Workshop, and I know we crossed paths a lot there, coming out to, to California for those meetings. It was a lot of fun and just such a great community. The identity community is fantastic, and so many great memories from that.
So a question, identity. The Internet Identity Workshop, which I continue to co-host, has become bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like,
I can only imagine.
This is not a problem that will ever be solved, by the way. And my own feeling about it is that, unless we're each in control of our own identities, we don't have any. We're just still going to stay where that is. But that's gigantic digression, and you've moved on. So. I want to ask, your current work is with Freedom, and for those watching, it's at Freedom.to. What got you into that? And tell us a little bit about the company.
Okay, so the company is a platform that allows you to manage and block distractions across all of your devices. So you can kind of think of it as parental controls for parents. And but what got me into that was sort of the same stuff that got me into identity. So studying social media and looking at sort of patterns of behavior in social media. So, I got interested in the identity angle, and that led to a company. And then I got interested in if social media is going to be this kind of permanent fixture, and we're always going to sort of have access to, all this distracting content, then how do we fight back against it? And so, I was a student studying social media, so I could legitimately go on social media as part of my research, but I wasn't getting my work done. And so I thought, okay, well, if this technology is going to be so distracting, and if we kind of like look out a couple years down the road, it's going to be more and more distracting, and the technology is going to get better and better, then how do we fight back against it? And so at the time, I sort of took a very a controversial take that, well, we can use technology to fight back against technology. And so started building apps that allow people to block distractions so they can reclaim their focus. And that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years now.
So I'm wondering, I mean, you timed this very well for the pandemic because it's sort of like if you weren't ADD going into the pandemic, you could easily become so once you're in it, right? You're chained to your chair, you're looking at Zoom all day, you're living in a little rectangle among a bunch of other little rectangles, while at the same time, you're also looking over here. There's email, there's lots of other stuff. How has that affected the work?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has been a game changer. I think it's forced so many more people to be online at a higher level, and it's also, it's forced people to think about how do they manage their distractions. So, the pandemic was, just complete game changer for us. It's interesting to sort of see how things changed. I mean, our basic premise is like blocking social media. So it's the most popular sites. It's like Instagram, Facebook, or news or sports or, whatever your distraction is. But we saw that change during the pandemic, and we saw, first of all, use just absolutely take off, which is just indicative of the fact that like people were just forced to be on their phones, constantly checking for information. I mean, because we had so many things going on during the pandemic. Not only did we have, this worldwide pandemic, we had social unrest, we had eventually a presidential election. I mean, we had all these things that were absolutely just dominating our attention. And so time on device just skyrocketed, and the need for something like this happened. But also, we saw the things that you might expect to change. So like Uber was an app that people blocked pretty commonly. I think they didn't want to call an Uber at the end of the night and waste money. We saw that absolutely fall off the table. But then we saw Uber Eats kind of take off. So it's sort of interesting to see the dynamics change as we were forced to stay in our houses or use more on-demand services. We saw that reflected in our data. We always thought it was pretty interesting. And that's certainly something that's continuing to this day. But I think looking forward, there's just going to be a big period where we're going to have to learn how to back off of our devices post-pandemic. We're not there yet. There's still a lot, but I think we sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the habits of, the individual habits, the habits of our kids who have been forced to be on screens for an entire year, there is going to need to be some kind of deprogramming around that. And, that's also going to be an interesting set of challenges.
So what does this actually look like? Looking at the website that just scrolled by for those who are just listening, I saw a picture of a computer, also apps. I like the idea of blocking things out, but could you give me a rundown of actually what it looks like on a day-to-day basis when you're using this technology, whether it's an app and describe actually what it actually looks like. How does it work? Sure. What does it actually do? And is it all devices? Is it computers? Do you choose? Yeah, if you'd give me a rundown, because it's fascinating, and I'd like to know more.
Yeah. Just a little bit of backstory. The whole idea got started as a little Mac app that I wrote like in one night in my spare time. That the only thing this app did was it was a little shell script, an Apple script actually, that would block you off the internet for 45 minutes. That's all it did. So it basically turned your computer back into a typewriter, and that was very effective for getting work done. And I put it out online, gave it away for free, put it on my website, and it kind of became a viral sensation. Writers found it and really liked it. And I ended up getting, requests from people, well, make it for Windows and add this functionality. And I said, well, if I'm going to maybe I can make these people go away if I okay, I'll do this work and I'll start charging for it. And, I won't have to think about this thing again. So I did that. I made a Windows version and I started charging a couple bucks for it. And, sure enough, that didn't make people go away. That actually kind of proved there was a business there. But what it is now, it's an application that it works on Mac, Windows, iOS, Android, Chrome, in browsers. We're trying to support all devices. And you install it and it connects to the platform, and on the platform you just make schedules for what you want to block. So very commonly, I want to work in the morning. I want to work from 9 to 12, and turn off the news, turn off social media, turn off distractions during that period of time, so people can they can start a session whenever they're distracted, or they can kind of pre-commit to their sessions. The pre-committing is important because there's a behavioral aspect of it as well. It's one thing for you to sort of get caught into a cycle of distraction where you're chasing down articles in Wikipedia, and 2 hours later you come back and you've lost all that time. It's hard to interrupt that. But what people find is, if I can set a schedule where, I know mornings I'm productive, I'm going to just set a Freedom schedule in the morning, and have stuff blocked. And it blocks a number of different ways. It can block apps, it can block websites, it can do allow lists. So, let's say you're taking an online course and you just want to get access to that online course, you can add that site to an allow list and everything else is blocked. So it's pretty flexible, and there's lots of features for advanced users who want to take care of that stuff. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are just saying, hey, turn off my email, turn off the notifications, turn off Instagram so I can focus. And we just do that at the push of a button. That's the value prop. There's other stuff there, but that's the very simple.
Cool. And so does it run as a service on OS 10 and Windows, and then the centralized scheduling app sort of syncs with that, and then it blocks things based on, mm-hmm. I don't know how you block it, but DNS blocks or whatever the process is. The scheduling is centralized, and then the individual platforms just kind of sync what to do, and they abstract how to do it on their own. Is that a fair
pretty much
understanding?
Yep.
Okay.
You've got to install it on your computer. So and every operating system is a little bit different. So we have to operate differently on mobile than we do on desktop. But the main way it works is either depending on how deep you want the blocking to work. You can either use a local proxy, so just a little proxy that sits on your computer and blocks things and allows things. Or we use automation services or scripting services to do blocking at a little bit higher level. So let's say somebody doesn't want to install a proxy, that's certainly understandable, or their work doesn't allow it. We've got a couple different levels which we allow. And so, that's always the challenge, is every operating system is different, and we try and make it so that it is at least, understandable to what they're doing and what they're trying to block, and make it simple. But that's pretty much it. And there is the centralized service, and they check into the service and pick up the schedules and change the schedules and do all that for you.
Okay, so this this might be a question fraught with monsters, but I'm curious, you may not have this information because I'm not sure how much of this is privacy, how much of it you have access to, but do you see the sorts of things that people are blocking? And that's not an accusatory question, that's a curiosity question. If anything changed during the pandemic, like since people are home all the time, have you noticed that things are blocked differently, or do you not have access to that? Or maybe that's two questions in one.
Yes, and I'll answer the question carefully. So, because some people have different expectations of that question. So, you tell us what you want to block. So inherently, we know that because you've told us, hey, turn off Facebook or turn off Uber Eats or whatever, or TikTok. We know that, and we are able to see those patterns change during the pandemic. What we don't do is we don't track any data or track browsing history or anything like that. So Freedom is a paid service. We don't track any data on users, do anything like that. So we don't have like, hey, here's how everything, all browsing changed during the pandemic. But we definitely have a view over what changed during the pandemic. And so we did an analysis of that. And I mean, the takeaways were blocking like doubled. So just people turned to Freedom and they just needed more time offline. The things that became very popular to block during the pandemic were things like news. Just turn off the news because it's doom and doom scrolling. So as those sites became very popular during the pandemic, people were also looking to block them. On-demand services became pretty popular to block during the pandemic. Of course, like the things that took off during the pandemic, like TikTok, became very popular to block, as people were just spending infinite time in their house and, locked away from, the world. They're just spending a lot of time on distracting sites. We did see some dynamics there, but the things that remained popular all through were, your sort of core social media services like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All those became more popular through the pandemic, and thus were blocked more. So we did see some of that, and we also saw things just completely fall off. Like I was kind of saying, like, just nobody needed to block Uber because they weren't taking car trips anymore. It's just kind of interesting that people feel the need to block Uber, but that's a whole other thing. Oh, online shopping. That was, that became a big thing. Seeing online shopping blocks show up kind of in late night sessions. So, I know that like that's a thing that I've read about in the news where, the retailers make money, people come home from, the bars and go shopping. Like, yeah, we definitely saw that reinforced in our data. So that was pretty interesting.
So I have a question about reprogramming ourselves and how you might do that. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Ever forgotten to check the date on a carton of milk? Like milk, your customer data goes bad. In fact, up to 30% of customer data goes bad each year. Melissa makes sure your data is accurate and current so you reach the right customers. Their tools have helped business maintain fresh data for over 35 years. That's why over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. You can verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time with Melissa. Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for 240 plus countries and territories at the point of entry. You can validate existing customer data and find new customers. Tired of having duplicate customer information in your database? With Melissa's data matching, you can eliminate clutter and duplicates, increase accuracy of the database, and reduce postage and mailing costs. Get the information that completes your customer profiles better and more thoroughly. Add consumer demographic information to your records, such as property data, marital status, and social media handles. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, business size, or budget. With flexible on-premise web service, secure FTP processing, and software as a service, that's SaaS, delivery options. Choose the best way to meet your unique business needs. Melissa continuously undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. Those include SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliance. Congrats to Melissa also for being named a leader in address verification by G2 Crowd in their spring 2021 report. Melissa is supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online at melissa.com. Don't put up with sour customer contact data. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log in, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. So Fred, it seems to me like what you're doing in a way is helping people reprogram themselves in a way. And what you've got are sort of like, you put in these guardrails or roadblocks that remind people that they shouldn't be doing this at this point in time. And of course, it's their choice. They've decided, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to shop. I don't want to go binge shopping late at night when I might not be sober. Yeah. And my needs may be amplified in some perverse way. But, but I'm thinking also that, and I've thought a lot about this, that we have become digital beings. I mean, we are extended by our phones and our pads and our computers, and we live in this other world. I mean, this digital world. I mean, where all of our butts point to some convergence point in the middle of the earth, but here in the digital world, where it's flat. I mean, you look right side up to me, you're actually at a slight angle in the physical world, right? From each other, because we're, the earth is a curved surface, and who knows? In this world, we don't know. But we're just beginning to acclimate to this. So I'm wondering if you've given any thought to helping people maybe even algorithmically on their own reprogram themselves so they can maybe, sort of like take the training wheels off, as it were. I'm trying to think of a better metaphor than that. But that's probably not a bad one.
You're right. We're in an interesting space, and we've been in one for the past couple of years as we've kind of seen this very rapid evolution of connective technology. I mean, I think going back to my research, I was studying the social impacts of technology. So that's, looking at the ways in which the tech we use change our behavior, change social fabric. And I was very interested in that and remain to this day. And so, one of the things that, the pushback against something like freedom is like, well, why do people need something like this? And that was a question more a couple of years ago. I think having lived through the past couple of years, people realize, okay, distracting technology is just so, it's just everywhere. And so having technology that can push back against it makes sense. But I mean, it's kind of this interesting set of questions around how do we think about the technology that we use? Is it a black box? And for many people, it is a black box. So the technology we use kind of acts upon us, and we don't necessarily ask if it's like good or bad. It just is the options that we're provided, and those options are getting more and more distracting each day, and they're just more and more part of the OEMs and the operating systems that we get. They're just woven into it. You can't buy an Android. I mean, I think you can buy an Android phone that doesn't have Facebook pre-installed, but it's pre-installed in most variants of Android. So there's an interesting point where we can sort of step back and say, okay, let's ask some questions about like, what are the priorities of my technology use? What do I actually want to accomplish, and how am I going to accomplish these things? And so when you sit down to write on your computer, when you sit down to do your accounting or whatever it is you want to get accomplished, there's these panoply of options that you can follow. I mean, you could switch a browser tab and be watching Netflix, and just that ability to switch has a cost. It pulls you away. You have to kind of fight it. You have to, really steel yourself to be a good person that, isn't going to be distracted. I'm going to get my work done, and that's mentally exhausting. That tears at our ability to actually get things done. Not to say that I'm against social media or against Netflix or any of that. I mean, there's a time and place for all of this. But when we think about our devices, we're not thinking about like, why is my device not supporting me proactively while I'm trying to get this work done? Because so much of what we do in our daily life is it's our identity, and when we're not accomplishing those goals, it is it hurts our identity. It makes us feel great, not great, and so software can realistically come in and help. So, at a very basic level, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface as we sort of think about like, where does work go from here? One of the things is, like you're saying, putting in the guardrails. So simple guardrails that guide you and pre-commit you can be very helpful because they're taking away the sources of distraction. So it's not just I can't get to Facebook. It's I don't even have the switching costs or the sort of the switching fatigue that comes from that, because I can actually have a computer or a phone or a tablet that is configured for work. But I mean, we're still at the very early stages of this because I have to go in and configure it. So, as you start talking about algorithms, it's very, I'm not going to say it's very easy, but it is pretty easy to understand when people are going to do their best work. So we can understand the time periods, and everybody's different. But, we could say, here's a time period where we're going to suggest that you, turn off X, Y, and Z, and you're going to be less distracted. And then expanding from there are all these environmental factors that can go into our understanding of, when do we get our best work done. So work is way more than just sitting down at your computer and getting things done. And even it's more than turning off distractions and getting things done. It's being emotionally ready. It's being mentally ready. It's being in an environment that works for you, like a physical environment. It's having your coffee or your croissant or your glass of water or whatever it is that you like to have when you sit down and work. It's all these kind of things that go together that help you do your best work. And so there's a lot of opportunity for our devices to be aware of that and suggest and potentially, guide you towards, hey, here's the best time for you to do your work. And I think what that ends up potentially pointing towards is we can get more work done, or we can get better work done in less time. I mean, I think with Freedom and kind of the way I think about productivity, I'm very much a believer in work smarter, not harder. And I think the technology can really enable that. So, we're just at the beginning of it. We've done some work in that area, but I think there's so much more to do, and just a lot of opportunity.
So I actually have a couple questions, but I'll try to ask them in some sort of a logical order. Specifically about the software itself, is there a mechanism to limit the amount of time you're on something? And what I mean by that is, I'll get somebody will send me a YouTube link and I want to follow it, right? Because it's probably funny if the person is funny, but I also don't want to get stuck in a 6-hour YouTube hole, which happens. Is there a timed feature where, Shawn, you're allowed to go to YouTube for 5 minutes and then it's gonna block the site? Does that sort of thing exist?
Yes. It doesn't exist in all operating systems because of just the nature of it. But we actually make a free Chrome extension. It's actually Chrome, Firefox, Opera. It's called a limit that does exactly that. You tell it how long you want to be on sites. I think we pre-populate a list for you with some suggestions, and it does just that. When you hit your limit, you're locked off for the day. That's actually available for free. That's not even a paid product. That's very popular. We even made a extension sort of during the pandemic that was focused on remote learners that was kind of limit on steroids. And what that would do would make you actually enter a PIN before you visited any site that wasn't on your allow list. So, let's say you just needed to get access to Google Classroom or Khan Academy, put those on your allow list. Any other site needs a PIN to get access to. And so, there are all these kind of interesting types of interventions you can do that help, because that's the big thing. It's the rabbit hole problem is, that's really it's so easy to have the time just fly away when you're when you get, when you go into those sites and you then get trapped into the algorithmic recommendations, which they don't want to let you go.
Exactly. Right. And I usually don't. So that kind of leads to the other aspect. How easy is it to cheat? And it sounds like maybe you can set various levels of things. Whether it's a pin or whether you're like, oh man, I got to go in and change my schedule. If it's a really funny YouTube video that I want to see part 2 of, how difficult is it for me to break my own rules, so to speak? And it sounds like maybe that there's multiple options there. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. We've got multiple levels of control there. So everything from pretty much making it impossible to uninstall to just allowing you to circumvent it if you want to. And again, that also will vary based on operating system, but we can make it quite hard for you to escape. What's kind of interesting about that is the original Freedom was designed to be very hard to escape. It basically set a script. You set a script that wasn't. You could reboot your computer and turn it off, but that would then interrupt your flow. And I always thought that was kind of a big thing. But when we look at the data, a lot of people are not running with that, what we call locked mode on. They're just using it to turn off the noise when they want to get their work done. So, but yeah, that's very much a popular thing, and very much a thing that we hear a lot of feedback about. And people say, well, make it harder. And it's well, there's a limit between what we can do and when we become malware. So we're trying not to become malware. So there are some limits, but we can make it pretty darn hard for you to escape. And one of the things that you can do is you can write into our customer service and ask. And a lot of people, they think we didn't see that as a feature, but they think of it as a feature, and it's kind of interesting.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, I see you haven't taken VC funds, so you're entirely bootstrapped. Is that right?
Yeah, we're not entirely bootstrapped. We took when we made the transition between the product where we were a sort of traditional software model selling downloads to a SaaS product, because when we knew we had to so when you subscribe to Freedom, it covers all your devices. So originally we were selling buy it for Windows, buy it for Mac, and that was just kind of not going to be sustainable when we looked at the future and said, oh yeah, people have multiple devices, they want to have a consistent experience, so we need to support all of their devices, but the best way to do that is through a subscription, because that allows us to make the ongoing maintenance that is required to keep up with all the operating systems. We raised a little money from angel funds, but we have not raised since then. We've been entirely bootstrapped, grown off our own revenue. Started as a single person company. We even got a grant from the state of North Carolina at one point, and we've grown to a staff of almost 25 at this point. So we've grown organically. I think back in the day, I'm not sure VCs would have funded us. We might have been laughed out of the room. We were certainly laughed out of the room by a lot of people, but now I think it's a very interesting set of problems, and it's kind of really the essential problem of the digital age, or one of them. We still have to figure out identity, but it's one of the big problems of the digital age, and so But having the ability to kind of fund our own growth has been good, because at each step of the game, we're kind of in control, and we can make really good choices on behalf of the users. And I think, I alluded to the fact, there's no aspect of Freedom that's also a data play. It's everything we do is just about just kind of solving this problem for people and focusing on that. So that's kind of our thoughts on it. Not that we, there may be fundraising in the future, but for now we're happy where we are.
So This is Floss Weekly, so I have to ask an open source question. So what is your continued involvement with open source, and how do you toe that line between, hey, I'm operating a commercial company here, but I'm still an open source guy? How's it go?
I know. Yeah, it's been interesting because I did come from the open source community where I think it was almost anathema to like touch money. Everything, and I mean that was such a incredible experience at Ibiblio where everything we did, it was just driven by the common good and trying to kind of move the open source community forward. And the first company I founded sort of had that ethos. We certainly didn't raise money, and we certainly didn't charge for our product. Now, it didn't succeed, so there was something there. But yeah, it has been sort of an interesting transition to go into a company where we are selling a product. So there was a headspace change. Our involvement in the open source community is, largely around contributing back to libraries and doing that sort of work. So there's a component of that on our engineering staff where we're using and contributing back to open source libraries. But I think some of the open source ethos also, flows through how we think about the business and how we think about, giving customers a fair deal and providing value and value for compensation, that allows us to grow. But it was really interesting. I mean, I came from this background where just money wasn't a problem, but of course money is a problem, and you need to figure out a way to fund your operations. So it's been a learning experience. But ultimately, I think we try and bring forward a lot of the principles that we learned in the open source community, into this work, and that not only kind of puts us on a fair stance with our customers, but I think it also helps with our employees, and everybody feels good about the job they're doing at the end of the day.
So just a quick question. Oh, sorry, I'm not on the screen there. Just a quick question from Jonathan Bennett. He's curious if this was inspired by the XKCD comic 862, where the guy shuts down his computer just because he was so distracted. And do you even know the comic he's referring to?
I do know XKCD well. I don't know that one. We'd have to check it. The original Freedom came out in 2009, and the where I got the idea from that is I was going to a coffee shop that didn't have Wi-Fi. So I was in graduate school trying to get my work done, and I would go to this one coffee shop, and like I said, it didn't have Wi-Fi. So basically forced your computer to be a typewriter, and this was before everybody had fast internet on their phones. And one day that coffee shop changed they opened up Wi-Fi, and it screwed up my whole plans. So I said, if there's no way for you to fight back against sort of the constant encroachment of connectivity, maybe we can use technology to fight for it. I don't know if Freedom is the first to do it, but we've been doing it for a long time.
Maybe he was inspired by you then. Maybe that's the
who
case.
knows? Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. So I know we're getting close to the end, but I'm curious about the Apple Store thing. You got kicked out. What was that like? And I mean, how long was that for? And I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I wanted to bring it up because it's fascinating.
Yeah. So, a lot of the antitrust that we're seeing now, we're a small part of that. I mean, there's lots of things that are part of that case. But in 2018, so we've been in the App Store since 2014. In 2018, Apple introduced a competing product that's pretty much, a clone of Freedom. That's fine. Certainly something Apple's done many times, but when they introduced the clone, they started making it harder for us to submit updates, and then they eventually made it so that it was impossible to submit updates, and then eventually, we just got kicked out of the store, and there's more to that story, but at the time they were kicking us out of the store, they kicked multiple other screen time apps out of the store. And we all thought, how is this possible? How is it, how is it that the largest company in the world could actually care about, a small little bootstrap company like ours enough to, try and kill the company? I mean, that's effectively what they did. They killed a number of competitors, and so there was a period of time where we were literally locked out of the App Store. We weren't allowed to make a client for the iOS platform, and so that was a very dark time for our business. Customers, understood it, but they were not happy about it. And we ended up, talking to reporters and trying to sort of get some awareness of what's going on. It didn't, like I said, it turned out that over 20 companies, were kicked out of the App Store in kind of a complete kind of wiping of the slate, so that there was kind of only one screen time app for iOS. And I mean, that's problematic on a number of levels, but, it's anti-competitive, and it's probably not good that there's just one screen time app. And there's a lot of use cases that Freedom supports that, screen time doesn't support. But it wasn't until the New York Times wrote a really detailed series of articles about the behavior that, when that came out, Apple very quickly allowed us back in the store. And it was kind of interesting because they said, oh, well, the reason they were kicked out of the store is because of privacy. And, that was never said to us in the process. It was all these kind of technical jargon and all these things that made it sound like, it was just impossible to sort of navigate. Later on, when we were reading the antitrust cases, a lot of that was just cover. So it was trying to get rid of a competitor. And, thankfully we're back in the App Store, and, we're able to, make this product and support users. But yeah, it was a really dark time.
Well, this has been a quick hour so far. It's not over, but it's coming close to the end here. And we always have a few final questions we like to ask. The first is, what's a question we haven't asked yet that you'd like us to have asked, so we can go there first? So
what the question I was going to say is, what was the sort of surprise feature that was popular during the pandemic, the surprise freedom feature? And I'll answer it. So the surprise feature was what we call focus sounds, and coffee shop sounds. So interestingly enough, when people were forced to stay at their homes, and they were not in an environment where they're working around other people, just turning on ambient sounds from a coffee shop turned out to be very important, or very popular. I don't know how important it is, but popular. And I mean, it actually kind of is important because it recreates a little bit that environment that we're used to working in. So, we offer it. There's lots of apps that offer coffee shop sounds, but if you're struggling working at home, maybe some ambient noise could actually help you out. It's an interesting thing.
That's funny. We were all dealing with ambient noise earlier. Leaf blowers here, and factory sounds,
the right kind.
Straightening out fender sounds in your place. I was thinking, for me, the coffee shop sounds were people nearby talking too loudly over music I didn't want to hear. So I don't know. That's an interesting possibility. Anyway, so three quick final questions. One is, these are sort of our control questions. One is, do you have anything to say about blockchain?
I don't. I really don't. It's not my area.
That's perfect. And the last two, what is your favorite scripting language and text editor? Yeah. So, back in the day, I wrote a lot of Perl, and so we have an inside joke that eventually our technical interview is going to, have some Perl in it just to make me happy. But that was my language as a kind of, I did a lot of sysadmin work, and
And then my editor, I use, I've been using what is it? The Microsoft one. I've been experimenting with that, but mostly I use TextMate too. So that's my day-to-day editor.
Excellent.
A lot of the people on the team use the Microsoft. Yeah.
Excuse me. Well, Fred, it has been fantastic having you on the show. Been looking forward to have you on for some time. You've been on the list, and finally we got you on, and would like to check back again at some future point on how it's going, because yours is a series of success stories, and I think it's really good to have those on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's great to catch up, Doc. It's great to see you. And let me know when you're back. We'll have to get you back to North Carolina.
We will. It'll happen.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
Okay, man.
Yeah. Thank you, Shawn. Yeah.
Thanks. So Shawn, how'd that go for you? Especially coming off the bench at the last minute.
Yeah. I'm actually almost glad that I came in cold, because I kind of got to learn about the product and everything from the word go. So I'm actually going to try it out. I mean, literally, because it really does seem cool. Also, I know that Fred is still here, because we don't have them hang up right away. But at the beginning, you guys were talking, and I so much wanted to interject. Do you know how much data I downloaded from Sunsite over my 2400 baud modem back in the 90s? I had no idea that Sunsite turned into Ibiblio. That was fascinating information. And so I was in the background here. I'm just like Googling, like, holy cow, that's so cool. So it was an awesome experience for me because of that even. And the other thing I couldn't stop thinking about had nothing to do with the show or open source. But if things don't work out with Freedom, I think a YouTube channel of people smashing bathtubs would be an instant hit. So maybe put a camera outside, Fred, and just record that stuff, because that go viral.
Well, that's great. So anything to plug before we get off on your end?
No, I've been focusing a lot on my webcomic. It's the thing I'm still enjoying a ton. So I think there it is. Sure enough, there's my comic. There's Spot, and I even you can actually see where it says "Buy Spot a treat." You can go and buy stickers of Spot, which is by far the most popular aspect of my webcomic. Is the little dog with his tongue hanging out. So anyway, that's what I've been working on, and blockchain stuff. One day I will be, I'd say, on the other side of the camera, but that's not really true. But I work almost fully with blockchain, doing Filecoin stuff now. So it's fascinating, interesting, related to IPFS. So someday we should nerd out and talk about that too.
No, well, we'll definitely have to nerd out on the show with that. Save it for the show. Just a quick one. Do you have any stats on how the comic has grown? Because I think it's really great.
So I don't, because I put the comic on so many different platforms, like all the social media platforms. And, there is the website. The website gets the least traffic, but I honestly don't even know how to get all of that data. I can tell you, though, I bought stickers and I've broken even. So I'm no longer in debt from buying stickers. I think so I'm going to call that a victory.
Well, that's a sign. Okay, well, if Tim Hwang ever wants to put on RaffleCon again, there was a thing called RaffleCon at MIT like 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And Moot was there from 4chan and Randall Monroe from XKCD. And we have it again. You should be there. So it'll be cool.
That would be cool. I gave Randall Monroe a Linux Journal ruler at a conference once, and I like to tell myself that he uses it for every comic that he makes now. I'm sure that's not true, but yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Shawn, and thank you, everybody. This has been another Floss Weekly. I'm not looking at the schedule, but I'm sure we have somebody great on next week. So it'll take too much time for me to stop and plug that specifically, but we will see you in another week's time. I'm Doc Searls. This has been Floss Weekly. See you then.
You know what's fun? Android. You know what's even more fun, though? all about Android. That's my show, Jason Howell, along with my co-hosts Ron Richards, Florence Ion, and we welcome guests on each and every week from throughout the Android ecosystem, developers, Googlers, journalists, people who are all geeked out about the Android operating system. We tell you everything you need to know. TWiT.tv/AAA every Tuesday. We'll see you there.